Evelyn had always dreamt of the perfect wedding. From the moment she met Chris, everything seemed to fall into place. He was kind, handsome, and seemed genuinely in love with her. They spent months planning, every detail meticulously arranged. The venue was beautiful, the dress was stunning, and the guests were all there, ready to celebrate their love. It felt like a fairy tale come true. As the ceremony began, Evelyn felt a rush of happiness. The soft music, the smiles on her family and friends' faces, and Chris standing at the altar waiting for her. It was everything she had imagined. But just as she was about to step forward, she felt a sudden chill. She glanced over at Chris, but his face had turned pale. Something wasn't right. Before Evelyn could ask what was happening, the doors to the venue slammed open, and a woman stormed in. The room fell silent as she marched down the aisle, her eyes fixed on Chris. The woman's voice echoed through the hall. "Chris, we need to talk." Now, Evelyn was frozen, trying to process the scene unfolding before her. The woman was familiar, but she couldn't place her. Chris looked horrified, and Evelyn's heart began to race. Who was this woman, and why was she causing such a scene at her wedding? The woman stopped just a few feet from Chris and turned to face the guests. She didn't seem embarrassed by the attention, but rather confident, even smug. "I think you owe me an explanation, Chris," she said, her voice calm but firm. Chris tried to speak, but he stammered, unable to form a coherent sentence. Evelyn's confusion deepened as she turned to look at the woman again. Was she a friend? An ex? The look on Chris's face made it clear he wasn't happy to see her, but why hadn't he said anything about her before? The woman's gaze shifted to Evelyn, who was still standing at the altar, too shocked to move. "I'm not here to cause trouble," she began, her tone softening. "But I think you need to know the truth about Chris." Evelyn's heart sank as the woman continued. "Chris and I have been seeing each other for months. We were supposed to get married. He promised me he would leave you." The words hit Evelyn like a punch to the stomach. She turned to Chris, her eyes searching for an explanation, but he remained silent, his eyes cast downward in shame. Evelyn felt as if the world around her was collapsing. The wedding she had spent months planning was being destroyed right in front of her eyes. She couldn't understand how Chris, the man she trusted, could betray her like this. She stood frozen for a few moments, her mind racing. The guests were whispering, unsure of what was happening, but Evelyn didn't care. She needed answers. "Is it true, Chris?" she asked, her voice trembling. He nodded slowly, not daring to meet her eyes. Evelyn's legs felt weak, but she refused to break down in front of everyone. Without saying another word, she turned and walked out of the venue, leaving the chaos behind. She could hear the muffled voices of her guests, but she didn't care. The one person who mattered the most to her had let her down in the worst possible way. As she stepped outside into the cool air, Evelyn felt a wave of anger wash over her. How could Chris do this to her? How could he betray her trust so easily? But more than anger, she felt something else, a cold determination. Evelyn knew she couldn't just let this slide. She had spent so much time, so much effort, making sure everything was perfect, only for it to be ruined by Chris and his deceitful actions. But what could she do? How could she get back at him for what he had done? The idea came to her almost immediately. She wasn't going to cry or beg for answers. No, Evelyn was going to get her revenge. Not with violence, not with chaos, but with something far more effective. Patience, strategy, and perfect timing. She would show Chris that the consequences of betrayal were more severe than he could ever imagine. Evelyn started gathering information about Chris's relationship with the other woman. She spent days talking to friends, former colleagues, and anyone who could provide a clue about their past. The pieces started falling together. The woman's name was Clara, and she had been in Chris's life for years, pretending to be just a friend. As Evelyn pieced together their secret history, her anger grew. She had been played for a fool. But now she understood Chris's actions, and that knowledge gave her a sense of control. She was no longer the victim. She was the one in charge. Evelyn began to take small, calculated steps towards her revenge. She made subtle changes to her appearance, something that would catch Chris's attention. She wanted him to see her strength, her resilience. The woman who had been heartbroken on her wedding day would soon be gone, replaced by someone unrecognizable. One evening, Evelyn ran into Chris at a cafe. He looked surprised to see her, his eyes darting nervously. She smiled at him, but it wasn't a friendly smile. It was cold and calculated. "It's a shame your little secret had to come out like this, Chris," she said softly, watching his face turn pale. Chris tried to apologize, but Evelyn wasn't interested in his excuses. "You had your chance, Chris. You had a chance to be honest with me. But you chose to betray me." Evelyn's words were firm, and her gaze never wavered. She stood up and walked out, leaving him speechless, his face filled with regret. Evelyn wasn't done yet. This was only the beginning. The more she thought about it, the more she realized how many ways she could make him regret his actions. She wasn't going to ruin her own life over him, but she was going to make sure he felt the consequences. A few weeks later, Clara reached out to Evelyn, wanting to meet. Evelyn agreed to the meeting, but not because she wanted to hear her excuses. She had a plan to turn the situation in her favor. When they met, Clara tried to apologize, but Evelyn just sat back and listened, letting Clara think she had the upper hand. "I understand why you did what you did," Evelyn said quietly. "But the truth is, you and Chris have no future. You're just a stepping stone in my plan." Evelyn knew Clara was vulnerable. She used that to her advantage, planting seeds of doubt in Clara's mind. She made Clara question her relationship with Chris, subtly hinting at things Chris had done that Clara didn't know about. Little by little, Clara began to doubt Chris's intentions. Evelyn wasn't just playing a game. She was setting up her final move. She knew that once Clara was convinced, she would have the leverage she needed to destroy Chris. It didn't take long for Clara to start pulling away from Chris. Evelyn could see it happening, and she knew it was only a matter of time before Chris would be left alone. Clara stopped answering his calls, stopped showing up at the places they used to frequent. And when Chris came to Evelyn, begging for her forgiveness, she just smiled. "You should have thought about all this before you betrayed me," Evelyn said. "Now it's too late." Chris, now completely alone, came crawling back to Evelyn. He begged for her forgiveness, offering her everything he could, his love, his devotion. But Evelyn had already moved on. She had exacted her revenge, and she didn't need his apology to feel complete. Evelyn smiled, watching Chris fall apart. It wasn't about making him feel pain. It was about showing him that his actions had consequences. She didn't need him to complete her life. Months passed, and Chris continued to struggle without Clara or Evelyn. He tried to mend his broken relationships, but nothing seemed to work. The more he tried, the more people turned their backs on him. Evelyn's revenge was working perfectly. He was isolated, abandoned by everyone he once cared about. One evening, Evelyn bumped into him again. He looked defeated, a shadow of the man he once was. She didn't say a word. There was nothing more to be said. The man who had ruined her wedding day was now paying the price for his betrayal. Evelyn had grown stronger from the ordeal. She had learned the importance of self-worth, of never letting anyone take advantage of her. She began to focus on her own life, her own happiness. She had a career, friends, and a new sense of freedom that made her feel powerful. She had no need for revenge anymore. It had already been served. But the experience had taught her valuable lessons she would carry for the rest of her life. In the end, Evelyn learned that revenge wasn't about seeking destruction. It was about taking back control. She had done it, and she had done it perfectly. She was no longer a victim of Chris's betrayal. She was the woman who had overcome everything and had emerged stronger than ever. As she walked away from her past, Evelyn knew that her life was just beginning, and nothing could ever hold her back again. Thank you for watching. Kindly share your thoughts in the comment section. Remember to like, share, follow, and subscribe to our YouTube channel for more videos.